My sister moved into the house my grandfather left me while I was away. New locks, furniture, even photos on the walls. When I showed up, she said, "We thought you'd understand." I called the police, but as I watched them panic, I realized this was only part of what they'd planned. My name is Darcy, and what happened to me last spring is the kind of thing you hear about and think, no, that doesn't actually happen to real people. It does. Happened to me. My grandfather, Earl, built a house with his own hands in rural Tennessee. 43 years he lived in that house. He raised 4 kids there, buried a wife there, grew tomatoes in the backyard every summer until his knees gave out. When he passed, he left it to me. Not to my parents, not to my sister. To me, Darcy, because, as his will clearly stated, I was the one who drove 3 hours every other weekend for 6 years to sit with him, watch old westerns, and make sure he took his blood pressure pills. Picture that house. White siding, green shutters, a porch swing that creaked in the most comforting way possible. That house was love made out of wood and concrete. Now picture arriving at that house after 8 months away. I'd been in Portland for work, a project that ran way longer than expected, and finding the locks changed. Not metaphorically. Literally. Different locks. And my sister Brielle's car in the driveway. I stood there on that porch for probably 2 full minutes, just staring at the door handle like it was going to explain itself. Do you know that feeling when something is so wrong that your brain just refuses to process it? That was me. 42 degrees outside, duffel bag on my shoulder, just standing there. I knocked. And I will never forget the look on Brielle's face when she opened that door. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't even surprise. It was this very careful, very rehearsed kind of calm. Like she'd practiced what she was going to say. And she had. "Darcy." She smiled. Actually smiled. "We thought you'd understand. You've been gone so long, the place was just sitting empty." I looked past her shoulder. New furniture. A different rug. And on the wall, photographs. Brielle's photos. Her kids' drawings framed and hanging where Grandpa Earl's clock used to be. I said, "Brielle, where is Grandpa's clock?" She said, "Oh, we packed some things up. It's in the garage." The garage. His clock. In the garage. Now, I know what some of you are probably thinking right now. Maybe I should have taken a breath, had a calm conversation, been the bigger person. And honestly, for about 30 seconds I considered it. I am not proud of how quickly that consideration ended. Called the police. I stood on that porch. My porch, the porch Grandpa Earl built. And I called the non-emergency line and explained the situation as calmly as I could manage. Which, I'll be honest with you, was not very calmly at all. And when Brielle realized what I was doing, that practiced calm, completely gone. She started making phone calls too. And that's when I understood. This wasn't just Brielle acting on impulse. The way she was talking, the names I heard her say, our mom, Patricia, our cousin Weston, this had been coordinated, planned. While I was 8 months away trying to build a career, someone had been building something else entirely. I watched 2 officers pull up to the house my grandfather left me. As they walked up the path, I thought, this is bad. This is really, really bad. But I also thought, I haven't even found out the worst of it yet. And I was right. So tell me, would you have called the police or tried to talk it out first? Drop it in the comments, because trust me, by the time this story is done, your answer might surprise even you. What those officers uncovered, and what I found out about what Brielle and my mother had actually been planning. Let's just say the house was only the beginning. The officers were professional. One of them asked me to walk him through the situation while his partner spoke with Brielle at the door. I showed them everything. A deed. The will. I even had photos on my phone of the house from before I left. Grandpa Earl's furniture, his clock on the wall, his worn leather recliner. The officer looked at the deed, looked at me, looked at the house. "Ma'am, this is clearly your property." Brielle, standing just behind his partner, said, and I quote, "She was never here. We've been maintaining it." Maintaining it. As if redecorating someone else's inheritance is a form of property management. I laughed. Not politely. A real one, the kind that escapes when something is too absurd for a normal reaction. The officer looked mildly uncomfortable. I don't blame him. Then my phone rang. Patricia. She wasn't calling to apologize. "Darcy, just don't make this a whole thing." "Mom, there are police officers on my porch right now." "I know, but Brielle has 3 kids, her situation with Marcus is falling apart. The house was sitting empty." "My house. We just thought." "We." "Mom, who exactly is we?" Silence. That silence answered everything. This wasn't Brielle's idea alone. Patricia had planted it. Brielle's marriage was collapsing, and my mother had apparently decided my grandfather's house, my house, was the solution. And cousin Weston. He'd helped them move furniture in one Saturday morning like it was some kind of favor. My mother, my sister, my cousin. Together, they decided my absence was basically permission. The officers gave Brielle 72 hours to vacate. I thought that was generous, but I wasn't in a position to argue. Brielle cried, big, real tears, and I won't pretend it didn't pull at me. She's still my sister. But then I glanced inside and saw Grandpa Earl's recliner shoved into the corner like an old piece of junk, and whatever I was feeling let go. I spent that night in a motel 2 miles from the house I legally owned. Vending machine crackers. Terrible sleep. That's when my great-aunt Roberta called. Grandpa Earl's younger sister, 71 years old and completely allergic to nonsense. 11:30 at night she said 4 words that stopped me cold. "Darcy, check the deed again." "I have the deed." I showed the whole deed, honey. Every page. Pulled it up. 3rd page, buried in the legal language I'd honestly skimmed. A clause Earl had added with his lawyer's help. About what happens to the property if it's occupied without the owner's consent within the first 5 years of inheritance. I read it 3 times. I called Roberta back and said, "Did Grandpa know what he was doing when he added this?" She laughed low, satisfied. Earl knew exactly what he was doing. Did you see that coming? 'Cause I absolutely did not. And realizing that Grandpa Earl had quietly prepared for this possibility, that hit me somewhere I didn't expect. What that clause actually meant for Brielle, for Patricia, for Weston, and what I decided to do with it, well, let's just say I didn't handle it as gracefully as I should have. But I handled it. Let me tell you what that clause actually said. In plain language, if anyone occupies the property without the legal owner's written consent within the first 5 years of inheritance, the occupying party is liable for damages. Not just back rent. Legal fees, property assessment costs, compensation for any alterations made without permission. Grandpa Earl, the man who watched westerns and grew tomatoes and never raised his voice, had quietly built a legal trap into his will. I sat in that motel room until 2 in the morning thinking about how well he knew his own family. About the fact that he loved us anyway. I called a lawyer the next morning. A woman named Sloane, recommended by Aunt Roberta. Direct, no nonsense, slightly intimidating in the best way. I laid out everything. The changed locks, the removed furniture, the alterations. She listened, then asked, "How much was changed inside?" I told her. New furniture. Different kitchen flooring. Grandpa's belongings boxed up in the garage. She went quiet for a moment. Then, they weren't just staying there. They were renovating. That word hit differently than I expected. Brielle hadn't just needed somewhere to stay. She'd been making it hers. Sloane said I had a strong case. Strong enough to send a formal notice to Brielle, Patricia, and Weston, since he'd physically helped move everything in. 3 names on 1 letter. I won't pretend that didn't feel a little satisfying. Brielle left on day 2 without a word. No call, no text. Just packed her kids and went. Her oldest, my 9-year-old niece Cora, waved at me from the back seat as they pulled away. That part wasn't satisfying at all. I walked into the house alone for the first time. Smelled different. Felt different, like someone had shifted everything just slightly off-center. I found Grandpa's clock wrapped in a dish towel in a cardboard box in the garage. I carried it inside, hung it back on the wall, and just stood there listening to it tick. Then Patricia called. Angry this time. Done negotiating. You're dragging your own family into a lawsuit over a asterisk house. Here's what I decided. I wasn't going to pursue the full legal damages. Not yet. Instead, I was going to give them one chance, to make it right on their own. Sloane thought I was being too generous. Aunt Roberta thought I was being too generous. Honestly, looking back, maybe I was. But I drafted a letter. Not a legal document, a personal one. To Patricia, Brielle, and Weston. I laid out exactly what they'd done, exactly what the clause entitled me to, and exactly what I was asking for instead of pursuing it formally. An acknowledgement, a written apology, and reimbursement for the flooring they'd replaced without my permission. Not revenge. Accountability. I sent it and waited. Weston responded first, which surprised me. A short text. Awkward, a little stilted, but genuine. "Darcy, I shouldn't have helped without talking to you. I'm sorry." That was it. Simple. I appreciated it more than I expected to. Brielle didn't respond for 11 days. 11 days of silence while I slept in Grandpa Earl's house, rehung his photos, and slowly made it feel like itself again. I repotted his tomato plants that had been moved to the back porch and half forgotten. Small things. But they mattered. Patricia didn't respond at all. On day 12, Brielle called. I almost didn't answer. Not out of anger, just exhaustion. But I picked up. She didn't apologize right away. She started explaining. Marcus, the kids, the financial pressure, feeling like she had nowhere to turn. And I listened. I actually listened because underneath all of it, she was still my sister and she was clearly drowning. But then she said something that shifted everything. Mom told us you'd probably just sell it anyway. I went very still. She said you never cared about that house the way the rest of us did. I said, Brielle, I drove 3 hours every other weekend for 6 years to sit with Grandpa. Silence. I know, she said quietly. I know you did. That was the closest thing to an apology I got from her that day. Not enough, but it was a crack in the wall and I noted it. Patricia, though. Patricia was a different situation entirely. A week later I found out, through Aunt Roberta who finds out everything, that my mother had been telling people in the family that I had kicked Brielle and her children out onto the street. That I'd shown up with police and thrown them out without warning. She was building a narrative, actively, and distributing it to aunts, uncles, distant cousins. Anyone who would listen. Do you want to know what I did when I found that out? I called a family dinner. No. I know how that sounds. Aunt Roberta told me I was either very brave or very foolish, and she'd need to see how it played out before deciding which. I invited Patricia, Brielle, Weston, and Aunt Roberta herself. Neutral ground. A restaurant in town, nothing fancy. A place where nobody could storm off too dramatically without it being obvious. Patricia almost didn't come. She showed up 12 minutes late, sat down without hugging anyone, and looked at me across the table like I was the one who had done something wrong. And that look, that specific look, is what made me realize something I hadn't fully understood until that moment. My mother genuinely believed her own version of events. She wasn't performing innocence. She had rewritten the story so completely in her own mind that in her version, she'd been trying to help. Brielle had been desperate, and I had responded with cruelty. She had cast herself as the reasonable one and me as the villain. And she had done it so thoroughly that confronting her with facts felt, to her, like an attack. That's a hard thing to sit across from. I had prepared what I wanted to say. Stayed up the night before organizing my thoughts. But sitting there, looking at my mother's face, I scrapped all of it. I said, Mom, I just want to know one thing. Why didn't you call me? She opened her mouth, closed it. That's all. 8 months and not one call. Why? The table was very quiet. What do you think she said? Because whatever you're guessing, I promise you're at least half wrong. Some answers don't make you feel better. They just make you understand more. And understanding can be its own kind of painful. What happened at that table, and what it set in motion between me and Patricia, that's where this story finds its way to something I didn't expect. Something that honestly I'm still not sure how to feel about. Patricia looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, because I didn't think you'd come back. The table stayed quiet. Not, I didn't think you cared. Not, I thought you'd moved on. She didn't think I'd come back. To Tennessee. To the family. To any of it. 8 months in Portland. A job that kept extending. And somewhere in my mother's mind that had quietly become a permanent departure. And rather than ask me, rather than pick up the phone and say, Darcy, are you coming home? She just made a decision on my behalf. Decided I was gone. Reorganized accordingly. I didn't yell. Honestly, I think I was too tired to yell. I just said, you could have asked me, Mom. She looked down at her hands. I know. 2 words. But the way she said them, something in her posture changed. Just slightly. Like a door opening an inch. Brielle was crying quietly to my left. Weston was studying the menu like it contained the secrets of the universe. And Aunt Roberta, bless her, reached across and put her hand over mine without saying a word. That dinner didn't fix everything. I want to be honest with you about that because I think these stories often skip over the part where healing is slow and awkward and sometimes goes backwards before it goes forward. Patricia didn't suddenly become a different person over pasta. Brielle didn't hand me a heartfelt letter of apology with a check for the flooring attached. But something shifted. Over the following weeks, Patricia started calling. Small calls, nothing heavy. A recipe she thought I'd like. A neighbor's news. The kind of calls that are really just a way of saying I'm still here, are you still there? I answered them. Not every one but most. Brielle and I met for coffee about a month later. Just the two of us. She told me more about what had happened with Marcus, about how scared she'd been, about how moving into that house had felt, and I'm using her exact word here, safe. Because it was Grandpa Earl's. Because it still felt like him. And here's the thing that got me. The thing I wasn't expecting at all. That's exactly how it felt to me too. We sat there in that coffee shop and talked about him for 2 hours. Stories I'd forgotten. Stories she knew that I didn't. And somewhere in the middle of all that, I understood that we'd both been grieving him. Just in completely different, completely destructive directions. She did reimburse me for the flooring. Paid it in 3 installments, which I respected more than a lump sum would have felt, honestly. It meant she was actually trying. Weston helped me repaint the porch on a Saturday in early November. Showed up with brushes and coffee and didn't mention any of it. Just worked. That was his apology, I think. Some people apologize with words and some people apologize with a paintbrush and 4 hours of their Saturday. Accepted both. And Grandpa Earl's clock, it's back on the wall. Ticking exactly where it's always been. I look at it sometimes and think about him sitting with his lawyer, quietly adding that clause, not saying a word to anyone. Protecting something he'd spent a lifetime building. I think he knew that loving a family and trusting a family aren't always the same thing. And I think he wanted to make sure I had the tools to navigate that difference. This house is mine. But it's also still hers. In the way that matters. In the way he intended. Am I still hurt? Some days, yes. Do I think my mother fully understands what she set in motion? Probably not entirely. But she's trying. And trying when it comes to family counts for more than it probably should. Would I do anything differently? I think I'd call Brielle sooner. I think I'd have that dinner before things reached a legal notice. But I'm not someone who had all the answers in real time. I'm just someone who eventually found her way back to the right house. If you made it this far, thank you. Genuinely. This wasn't an easy story to tell, and it's not a perfectly resolved one. But it's mine. If any part of this hit close to home for you, I'd really love to hear about it in the comments. And if you think I handled something wrong, tell me that too. Can take it. If this story meant something to you, a like goes a long way. It lets me know these things are worth sharing. And if you have your own version of this kind of story, drop it below. You might be surprised how many people are sitting there nodding along. Take care of yourselves. And maybe call your people before someone else makes a decision for you.